Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, Los Angeles. Welcome, poets. Welcome, poetry. And welcome to Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center. My name is Quentin. I am Beyond Baroque's executive director, and we are thrilled to be here on the final day of the Southern California Poetry Festival 2022. We've been having a fantastic time over the past 3 days, just celebrating Southern California poetry, a whole range of poets, styles, panels, talks, workshops as well. This is the penultimate event. We have one more after this. So thank you to those of you who have come to the festival. If this is your first event here, I hope you'll stick around for the last one. Talk about that in just a second. But today, this afternoon, right now, we are here to celebrate the Best American Poetry 2022, which just recently came out. We're going to have a little bit of a reading. We have with us Amy Gerstler, Alexis Sears, Prageeta Sharma, as well as the editor of BAP, as they call it, 2022, Matthew Zapruder. Am I allowed to say that, BAP?
Yes,
yeah,
you
okay.
are allowed to say that.
We're casual here.
Anybody above the rank of an assistant director.
Okay, yeah, that's what I've been working towards. But before we get started, I would just like to begin by acknowledging Beyond Baroque's presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielina Tonga peoples. We acknowledge the wrong done to these peoples through settler colonialism, genocidal practices, and the violent dispossession of their lands. As an arts organization, we are committed to uplifting indigenous writers, their stories, their art, their poetry, and their history. To say a little bit about Beyond Baroque, for those of you who don't know, we are very much a space, a community, as well as an organization dedicated to the artistic possibilities of language. We present contemporary literature and art, and we also strive to build a diverse literary community. That work encompasses a number of different projects, including festivals, readings, performances. We have an art gallery, we have a bookstore, we have an archive documenting the history of small press literature in Los Angeles since the 60s. We also just have sort of other interesting events in here, films, dance, music, pretty much anything that falls within the arts probably happens here at one point or another. But above all, we're focused on poetry. We do have one more program, as I mentioned, as part of this festival. After this event, we have a really special reading with Lynn Thompson, Bridget Bianca, Shonda Buchanan, Connie Williams, Tongo Eisen Martin. Tongo is the poet laureate of San Francisco. Lynn is the poet laureate of Los Angeles. So we're excited to close out the festival with that reading. Please do come back for it. Just looking ahead over the next few months, we have a memorial for the late, great Linda J. Albertano on December 10th. She's an incredibly important part of Beyond Baroque and LA's poetry community. So I hope you'll come back for that. And then looking to the next year, we have celebration of our poet in residence, his new book, Will Alexander. He's going to be in conversation with Kamau Daoud, the founder of the World Stage. As well, we'll also be launching a new interdisciplinary series co-curated by the poet Daniel Tiffany, focused on bringing poetry together with sound art, performance art, experimental film, and whatever other hybrid concerns we might dream up. So check our website about some of that upcoming stuff. It should be up soon. I did want to say a few words of thanks for this program. First, big thank you to Beyond Baroque staff, including Jimmy Vega, Yvonne Salinas, Jessica Wong, Eric Alberg, Eliza Gislason, all of our volunteers. We've got a number of people who just pitched in over the past several days, so thank all of you. I should also say we're very much indebted to the Poetry Foundation for making this whole festival possible. It's a grant from them that has allowed it to be possible. So thank you to the Poetry Foundation, and thank you to all of you, especially those of you who are members of Beyond Baroque and donors. You've supported us through the pandemic and our reopening. If you're not a member, it does cost. Poetry isn't the most expensive thing in the world, but it does cost money to run a place like this, to put on a festival like this. So please consider becoming a member. It costs as little as $50, $40 if you're a student. You can become a member in our bookstore, online. It's a huge help, or even just throw some money in the tip jar outside when you grab a glass of wine. Venmo us, whatever. We do appreciate it. I won't say too much more about Beyond Baroque. I know we're here for the poetry. So this this is a really exciting event for us. Best American Poetry comes out every year, has a different editor, and this year I was just really, really excited to learn that Matthew Zapruder was editing it. We know Matthew very well. He's a brilliant poet, a brilliant critic, a writer on poetry, and a brilliant editor. And fortunately, he's here in California. He's visiting us from the Bay Area. And we knew there was some poets in the area that were included in the anthology. So we thought, let's have a little bit of a reading and then have a little bit of a conversation about contemporary American poetics. And so without further ado, I'd just like to bring up Matthew to talk a little about the anthology and read as well. So just to tell you more about Matthew. Actually, I printed out, this is the second time I've done this in this festival. I printed out the wrong bio. But
Just read it.
Just literally, I did this on Friday night. I do not learn. I apologize. It's a little bit about Matthew's. What I have here is about Matthew's recent book. But I will say, without further ado, please welcome Matthew to be here. He's fantastic. I apologize.
Thank you, Quentin. It's great to be here. I was just saying to Amy, I think the final event that I did before the pandemic was here, a reading with Amy. That was the last time I had done an event. So it's really nice to be back. I hope it doesn't happen again. Thanks so much to Quentin, Beyond Baroque, and everybody who's worked on this festival, and just everybody who works on Beyond Baroque and supports it. And it's just such an incredible thing that you have this here in LA. It's just so cool. There aren't that many things like this around the country, so, I mean, if any, so it's really to be treasured and supported, and Quentin does such an amazing job, and this is, I'm sure, has been an incredible weekend. I am not going to talk a lot about this book, other than to say that we'll talk more together after everybody reads, and thank you so much to the poets for coming to read. So cool, I cannot wait to hear the reading. I spent a year. I enjoyed a year reading as many poems as I could find last year, and just looking through every possible nook and cranny that I could get to. Chose 75 poems. We can talk about the word best later. It's silly, obviously. Cannot read everything, cannot include everyone. That's absurd. But nevertheless, I hope it's a good book of American poetry, and I'm proud to have included all these poets, and happy to talk about that more with these great poets. So what I was going to do is just read, I was reading each time I've read from this book a poem by Dean Young, who recently passed away, really amazing poet and close friend. And now a second poet from this book, Gerald Stern, has passed away, so there are two poems to read from great American voices we've lost. So I thought I'd read Dean's poem, Jerry's poem, and then I'd read one poem by that's very new, so I will read off my phone. My apologies. So I'm just going to start with Dean's poem, which is called Spark Theory, and it appeared in Conduit, which is an amazing magazine from Minneapolis. Spark Theory. Things flow one thing to another. A hearse pulls up and idles. Some plywood makes a peep. Dark shapes in the doorway can't be helped. It's not an insufficiency of electricity that we need worry about. The stuff's just bouncing off the streets. The hearse is yellow with pollen. The hearse almost covered with snow. There's always this flow. Rowboats, marriages, upside-down rainbows of spilled gasoline. Here comes a strange mailman. Here comes a chihuahua chewing a rubber band. Here comes otherness in a flimsy dress. A bird flies into a cotton tree, a love letter crammed in a mannequin's head, what she said that day by the water with the ashes making their arabesques. Simultaneously not being here yet, being nowhere else. Occasions for evaporation, perfumes of the incinerated instants. A man carried from his own house in pieces, like a harp. And then this poem by Jerry Stern, who I'm sure most of you know who that is, but one of the greats. I cannot recommend reading him enough. This is called Lest I Forget Thee, and I believe it was an American Poetry Review. Lest I Forget Thee. Ignoring the still waters and the kingdom of Babylon some call America, I practice my different strokes in the 3 river systems of Pennsylvania, and once in a wool bathing suit at the far end of the steel pier, a city block away from the safe sand, and my 2 uncles buried there except for their noses. Still waters also in the quarry off Route 32, where our cars and bikes lined up in the dirt beside the concrete. But there was no Babylon, no one there mourning for their village, only naked bodies leaping from rocks and either hugging the shore or swimming madly the half-mile or so into the tall grasses on the other side. Me among them. And since there was very little music, we gathered around one of the tapes, sharing the sound until we dove back in. But I no longer heard it as I approached the grasses, though I heard something else. And I'm going to read just one poem, which has appeared on my phone so far. That is where it has appeared. And it is a poem for Jerry Stern, whom I didn't know Gerald Stern personally. I think maybe I shook his hand one time or something. But I did one time, a long time ago, when I was in graduate school. A friend of mine went to Iowa and knew Jerry Stern, and we were invited to a party at his house in New York, or his apartment or something. This was very exciting. So I went to Somerville to find my friend, and we drove down to Boston. We parked the car, whole thing. Cost like $1,000 to park the car for 3 hours. And then we go to the buzzer, boop, and it's the wrong night. It was the next weekend. So that tells the tale of my efforts to network. But anyway, so that I mentioned that event towards the end. But yeah, this poem came out rather quickly after I heard that Jerry Stern had died. It's called Dead Flowers for Gerald Stern. Dead flowers. Now that you are gone, I'll probably get hit by a piano dropped from a cloud. My son turns his light on so early, I've already thought unspeakable thoughts and written the word learning outcomes without a microspeck of irony or shame. Now that you're gone, these couplets belong to you, who will never drive again along some river with too many consonants in its name. You were always talking about dancing under a stolen hat. I told my friend I was going to write you in the hospital, but as is my way, I never did. I keep learning. If you don't write it down, the thought just flies away. Where does it go? Maybe into the trees or someone else's head. And isn't that the point anyway? Now that you're gone, I'll probably die holding a book I told people I read. I can say I lied about reading Nietzsche, and that it was beautiful to be a nun having unspeakable thoughts, and you will not hear me. Or maybe, who knows? I remember going to your door on the wrong evening with a friend I see no longer. The party was next weekend. We listened to Dead Flowers all the way back to Boston in shame. Now that you are gone, I can finally write this poem. I can say the only true thing. I remember going to your door. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Another round of applause for Matthew Zapruder. Our next reader is someone we know well here at Beyond Baroque, Amy Gerstler. Amy's most recent book of poems is Index of Women. Her work has appeared in a variety of magazines and anthologies, including The New Yorker and Paris Review. She's currently collaborating with composer, actor, and arranger Steve Gunderson on a musical play. Previous books of poems include Scattered at Sea, Dearest Creature, Ghost Girl, Medicine, Crown of Weaves, Nerve Storm, and Bitter Angel. In 2019, she received the Foundation for Contemporary Arts C.D. Wright Grant. In 2018, she was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship. She's also written fiction, nonfiction, journalism, and art criticism. One of the things we like to say here at Beyond Baroque is that we nurture writers and poets, and one person we talk about quite a bit is Amy Gerstler, because she got her start in our workshops worked at Beyond Baroque for a good long while, was very involved here. I realize it's a little bit of a silly thing to say we nurture, someone like Amy. I would rather say that she's actually nurtured us through years, decades of work with Beyond Baroque, and then as an absolutely brilliant poet. So please, everyone, welcome Amy Gerstler. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Quentin, but it is completely true and actually an understatement that this place nurtured me. I grew up here. I was practically a baby here, and this place changed my life. And I'm so amazed and grateful that it's still here to do that for writers and artists. And I'm really happy to be reading with these three writers, all of whose work I really respect and like so much. I'm a bit of a stowaway in this event because I'm not in this anthology, but that means that I get to read somebody else's poem out of the anthology, which I'm excited about, and I'm going to read a poem by a lovely poet, Major Jackson, that appeared in the Northwest Review called Ode to Everything. Somehow I have never thought to thank the ice cream cone for building a paradise in my mouth. And can you believe I have never thought to thank the purple trout lily for demonstrating its six-petaled dive? Or the yellow circle in a traffic light for illustrating patience? My bad. In my life, I have failed to praise the postman whose loyalty is epic, the laundress who treasures my skinny jeans and other garments, and the auto repairman who clangs a wrench inside my car, tightening her own music. Were my name called, and I were summoned on a brightly lit stage to accept a little statuette, after staring in utter disbelief, I would thank my dentist, as well as my neighbor who sits vigil beside the dying, far away from the lights, and my fourth grade teacher who brought down 3 taped rulers on my hands as a punishment for daydreaming out a window during an exam I had already completed. Mea culpa. Now that I know the value of the peaks across from Flanders Hill, I will forever express reverence for their green crowns. I will never again fail to say small devotions for the scar on a friend's face that lengthens when I walk into a room. That's Major Jackson. Now you get about 6 or 7 minutes of me. This is a cute little love poem called The Bible as Literature. She clubbed her new husband to a pulp with a fire extinguisher when she was young. These things happen. Years later, I met her in a class called The Bible as Literature. We learned that books on scrolls unfurl in just one direction, surging forward like waves breaking. Paged books, however, allow us to jump around in a narrative, go back, leap ahead, as many of us ache to do at times in our lives. Whether I should have known that the way her face broke into cubist fragments as I tried to memorize it was a sign that she would soon turn the page on me, whether, despite her absence, I continued to love her in slow-dripping biblical time, racked by sky-cracking thunder and slaked by puddled honey, or whether she flashed in and out of my life like lightning, I will not say. She needed to keep moving. If you can make out the shape of her person from behind this prison of horizontal bars, the lines of this poem, you're a better man than I. Okay, this next thing I'm going to read is an attempt at something called a sonnet crown, which is just a bunch of sonnets that are linked together, and the last line of one is repeated in the first line of the next, but I didn't exactly do as many as you're supposed to, so it's probably only a sonnet tiara or something. So this is called the Elizabeth Sonnets. 1. Today I'll listen to whatever music Spotify has in mind. Concerto for Black Holes and Slime Molds by the Panty Sniffers? That algorithm knows me so well. I've pitched myself under this magnolia tree, heart first, before I get lobbed any place worse. No more of Grandpa's stuffed marlin glaring at me from the living room wall. No more robocalls offering to restructure debt never incurred. No more doom scrolling for the moment. I've retreated to the bosom of nature, where bird chirps whir like sticks being fit into a wood chipper, and magnolia leaves clatter into my lap like leather wings. Lizzie has flown off to Mexico. She believes in UFOs. She wants to be called Elizabeth now, to leave her sad past behind and bask in the mysteries of sex and drugs and panhandling and side hustles. And is that really so bad? 2. It seems really bad, or at least alarming to me, though I too was a hot mess in my 20s, so long ago in a different era and circumstance. I'm still a sunken ship riddled with eels, I'll admit that up front. But since I'm using Elizabeth's travels and travails as a thinly veiled excuse to talk about myself, let's get back to her. Elizabeth's nose runs constantly. She suffers from asthma and eczema. She loves animals, toddlers, psychedelics, and girl bands. We share 3 of these 4 loves, since I've been reduced by advancing age to pretend I prefer booze to hallucinogens. In the violent tides of her 20s, Elizabeth shed the last of her baby fat, then graduated from stumbling spiritual seeker to apprentice sensualist. She wants. 3. She wants to spit in capitalism's tea, impress older, heavily tattooed sensualists, the kind who leave teeth marks, kick patriarchy in the nutsack, darken her hands with the red and ochre dirts of other worlds, learn 5 languages, but only by osmosis, while chasing 99 kinds of buzz and trying to pull free of the tar pit of history. At her age, one is pure urge. Life is a wildfire. So it's no big sin that her bedroom resembles a place where, amongst all their hoardings, a pair of hoarders just staged a 24-hour wrestling match. I just worry about her. Like I have the right, me, who brims with wrongful convictions all day long, then tucks herself into bed at night with 10 stuffed animals and an Ambien sandwich. So what am I trying to say? 4. Am I saying, Elizabeth, that in your attempts to enter heaven, you're crashing the wrong gates? That I wish you'd find life-guiding messages someplace other than in sidewalk scatters of pollen? Oops, I do that, not you. Clearly, projection is one of my sins. Maybe your determination to get lost is a valid response to any decade in which people feel like they're about to be vaporized daily. It's a crippling time to be young. I want the magnolia to reach down its branches and hug me. My 20s was a rapturous tantrum, during which I aspired to be lady, tiger, and pirate, all rolled into one. When I try to recall that madness, it seems like it never really happened, or as if it did to someone, but I'm not sure I was ever there myself. Okay, last poem. I broke a rule to write this poem, which is to never write a poem about poetry. It kind of says that in the poem. This is called Pucker and Fizz. Poems are prophetic, or mimetic, or eidetic, or pathetic, or regretic, or pleading. Poems can be freewheeling seas of molten feeling, or trance-inducing, corseted, or misleading. Poems leave traces everywhere, as beasts leave tracks upon earth and air with wings and feet. Thank you, poetry, for protecting me from collapse, sack, overthrow, and defeat. It was sweet of you. And thank you, poetry, for inviting me to dine with the Society of Extinct Animals, hearty eaters all, and each a fan, since their rise and fall, of shouting into the obliterating wind. Poetry, is it wrong for me now to break my lifelong vow never to talk about poetry in a poem? And poetry, from whence do these fits of love assail me, as I watch dogs slurp water, or when I sip a puckery citrus fizz? Insistent as riptides, where do these spasms of love for all that is come from? My guts? My shrunk to a raisin brain? These sudden loves drive me bonkers and save my bacon. But what am I to do when seized by racking transports of adoration daily in ways I can't contain? Here, poetry, you take them. Thank you for listening.
Another round of applause for Amy Gerstler, please. Yes, thank you, Amy. Next up, we have Alexis Sears. Alexis's first book, Out of Order, won the 2021 Donald Justice Poetry Prize. It was just published by Autumn House Press. Alexis received her BA in writing seminars from Johns Hopkins University and her MFA in poetry from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her work has been widely published, including in Rattle's Poets Respond. With her Heartbreak Guzzle, she was a scholar at the Sewanee Writers Conference in 2019. This is slightly out of date. It says she lives in Oakland. I think she's in Los Angeles.
Now.
So please, everyone, welcome Alexis Sears.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Hi. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for including me. I'm honored to be with these brilliant poets right here. And I'm super happy that you're all here on a Sunday to listen to some poems. So thank you so much. I'll read some poems from my only book, actually, Out of Order. And I'll start with the poem that was included in the anthology. The poem is called Hair Sestina. And to provide some background about Hair Sestina, I'm mixed race, half black, half white. And my father, who was black, passed away when I was very young, so I sort of grew up not really knowing that part of my history and my culture. And it kind of dawned on me one day when I was in the car, I don't know any black hairstyles. I don't know what any of that is. So it was kind of jarring to me, and it inspired me to write this poem, Hair Sestina. I'm 24, and yes, by now I know I have a problem. Oh, but don't we all? Everyone jokes, as if it's really brilliant. But not like this. A slippery chunk of life has slid on by, and still I am without an inkling of real knowledge about black hairstyles. Some bus driver says, you're black in name, but you will never really know their struggles. There, it sticks. I'm left without a comeback, since I know it's true. She's all proud now and continues on, your life seems easier than most. Gee, that is brilliant. I'm not sure if I'm hurt or not. A brilliant professor told me once her hair dyed black as licorice bites. Sometimes, in life, you'll want to cry but can't. Just so you know, the answer is to bite your thumb, that's all. My cluelessness, though, soon I'll be without a thumb, without a life, a man to dine with, out of time. I only care about hair now. Brilliant black scholar is what I aim for. I spend all my leisure time these days researching black hair looks. I nod, I practice, hope I'll know a twist out when I see it. I watch Life, the one with Eddie Murphy, plan a life where someday I'll have cornrows, braids, without the insecurity. Should I? Oh no flashcards. What's the point of being brilliant when I wear white girl hair to Sam's Club, lack inheritance and understanding? All I know is this. It wouldn't be right to call what happened to me abandonment. See, life can be too hard for us, including my black father, once Marine, 6'2", without someone to speak to, even me. Not brilliant, but he could have helped me come to know my hair, my blackness, self. Oh well, without some emptiness, what's life? 24, brilliant, accomplished, all I know is what I don't. Okay, this next one is a little bit lighter. It's called September. September. I know I could do better. I could go outside, get some sun. Instead, I watch from my window as the snow falls, as if God is grating Parmesan over the city. Say when. I've never had the chance to love desperately, but I felt rage worm its way through my stomach like a parasite. So many things I cannot say aloud. It would be wrong to bring a child into the world to watch me suffer, to suffer with me. Won't win me any friends. Am I worse off than anyone else, though? I sip my dark roast, spell my name in carrots on the counter. I am no longer, at least, a monument to damage, my rib cage a coliseum, its broken edges jabbing at the sky. The faint sounds of earth, wind, and fire play in my kitchen, and I smile, even shimmy a little. None of us will last forever. Someday, maybe soon, everything will ache a little less. So this next poem is called The Wedding Gown. It's actually a little bit embarrassing, but you seem like a trustworthy crowd, so I'll tell you, for a very long time now, I've been really obsessed with wedding gowns, and for a very long time now, I've been very single, but this poem, Wedding Gown, it takes a line, the very last line is stolen from a poet named Chidiock Tichborne. Not sure if you've heard of him, but he wrote this poem when he was in his early 20s, the night before he was supposed to be executed. He ended it with, "My glass is full and now my glass is run." So with that in mind, that's in the poem, and I'll start. The Wedding Gown. My coworker's face twists like a cubist painting when I tell him I found my wedding dress, tainting his spotless afternoon. Clearly, he's equating my honesty with crazy. He says, "What the fuck?" Slamming his Corona, his fingers limp and icy, on the table. The damn thing, the wedding dress I mean, has never gotten this reaction. Jamming the lime back into the bottle's tiny open mouth, he goes quiet. I do too. Maybe I should keep this one a secret. My shit show of a love life, after all, that doesn't lend itself to marriage, is a riot. My college roommate called my life a sitcom. Obsession is my mother tongue, the indie drummer who pounds his aggression to a powder, the blisters on his hands, ornaments, the singer's lyrics of depression, now irrelevant. 3 pages of a spicy sonic crown, each I am sizzling onions in a pan. My eyes in certain pictures, brown as light roast coffee beans and filters, boots that make my ankles bleed. And now the gown, its long sleeves lacy, suited for a goddess, a tease of a neckline, a tulle pearl skirt that falls like freshly straightened hair. My best friend texts me, "Cool, I like the bodice," when I send her yet another picture. "You know, the golden rule," she says. "Stop looking for love. That's when it arrives." But one by one, as classmates turn to brides, I wonder if their new domestic lives have more meaning than mine, and if this whole obsession thing survives. Does it just sail away? Or is it killed too suddenly to suffer, a victim of a palm tree through a windshield? I want to sneer and even contradict him when my coworker mumbles, "So bizarre." Or turn to friends and laugh, see how I tricked him, and he'll relent. The jackass knows I've won. But what's the point of speaking now? It's done. My glass is full, and now my glass is run. Okay, thank you. Thank you. You're all so nice to me. I think I have a few more minutes, so I'm going to read this poem, and I'll provide some context as soon as I can find it on my phone. Okay, so to provide some context, last year when I was living in Oakland, I went out with a guy I really liked, and coincidentally, the day after, I passed out in front of my high school class I was teaching. I know the whole idea of like falling when it comes to romance is cliche and trite and all that, but it kind of seemed like the universe was handing me an idea, don't you think? So this is called Vertigo. 1. The nurse says I have vertigo, and I reflect on every song I've ever heard about falling. Once I had a fascination with etymology, so yes, I know that fall comes from the Old English phelan, which means to fail, drop, decay, or die. In my mind, failing, dropping, or decaying, hell, even dying, might be preferable to what I'm far too quickly feeling now. 2. The fall was public, as falls always are. Of course, in front of 20 high school freshmen, around me voices hazy like a chorus of hapless barflies belting out the oldies. I'll let you in on something. Years ago, I dreamt of falling from a New York high-rise window, like that old musician's son. Or maybe I just leapt, one of those girls who seemed to come cascading from the clouds. 3. Last night we drank 2 lagers each. You gave me a bag stuffed with your favorite strain of weed. I bet that if you smoke this, you'll hurt less. You called me lovely in Vietnamese. We took turns tracing each other's noses, cheekbones. I watched you lift your beer with your left hand. You said, I read online that lefties die before everyone else. How did I sense that death will likely have you before I do? 4. I make a pact with God not to obsess about my latest health catastrophe. No, I'd rather think about the Nissan you steered to Joshua Tree to make your films. If, yesterday, you fried or poached your eggs. How long you've had that retro baseball cap, your hand around an overflowing glass. Thank you.
More applause for Alexis, please. Thank you, Alexis. Our final reader is Prageeta Sharma. Prageeta is the author of the poetry collections Grief Sequence, Under Gloom, Infamous Landscapes, The Opening Question, which won the 2004 Fence Modern Poets Prize, and Bliss to Fill. She's the founder of Thinking Its Presence, an interdisciplinary conference on race, creative writing, and artistic and aesthetic practices, and she's also the Henry G. Lee 37 Professor of English at Pomona College. So please, everyone, welcome Prageeta Sharma.
Thank you so much for, wait, you can hear me just like that? Or, okay, great. Oh, it's fabulous. I don't have to, cool. That's exciting. Thank you so much. I've been such an admirer of Beyond Baroque for many years. I moved here in 2019 from Montana, where I was for 12 years. But just so it's really just a pleasure now, just being able to be here in California and be in the wonderful company of these really amazing poets. Thank you. I'll start. I guess this new poem that's in the anthology is also part of my new manuscript, titled One Mint One, and it's one mint, and it's WON, and it's taken from Barnett Newman, the painter, who had a series of pieces called One Mint, and they were numbered. And the first one was One Mint Number One, but I just switched that number to WON, and I'm thinking about three threads of just engagement. One with a past, with a hard past, which this first poem is about. My late husband died of cancer, and after he died, I just discovered a little bit about how complicated our marriage was. Widowing. The last of your studio boxes towering this new basement that I cleaned for good. All this in year 4. In them, I find a lone condom, a buried treasure of your lost virility. Was it saying something lonely to me, and then not to me, but to a stranger, another one? When you were alive, I had found a condom in your computer bag. You balked in your stupid rage and told me it was so old, from when we used them back in 2002. I knew they only have a span of 5 years. They stream upstream in their packages. This one expired in 2016. You died in 2015. When did you buy this last condom? Nobody talks about the difficult grieving process of mourning your husband and then his secrets and vices left in corner plastic bins. But this is why I built a synthetic cave around my disappointments, like the chemicals that drowned your sense and reason, and left only an outward charm of deflection like a collected banality. Your sister, a nurse, after washing your body, cleaned up your fentanyl patches with their glassine coverings on the laundry room floor behind the washer and dryer. You took it with your chemotherapy, but you were also sneaking it for years. You were always searching for painkillers, hiding them high up from me, or in your bins at your studio full of drawings, cartoons, and scribbled poems that make so obvious how you lived inside yourself with a kind of agony. In your own fallible body, its chronic pain, and what it really called forth, an insatiable carrying of a private penury, your only sojourn. So yeah, I've been thinking about the concept of one mint. I've also been thinking about ornaments as they relate to Anne Enling Chang, this scholar who writes about ornamentation and Asian identity. But actually, it doesn't really relate to this next poem, which is called Therapist versus Counselor. So when I lived in New York, everyone called their therapist a therapist. When I moved to Montana, everyone called their therapist a counselor. So I was just kind of interested in that. Therapist versus counselor. I prefer therapist because the term counselor suggests the patient is not a patient, but a passerby in need of menial advice. Did you grow up by the sea or close to its New England windows? Did your psyche let in the tranquility of being near the sea? I pretend I did so I can learn more about the illustrative tide, see if it helps me breathe, if it calms my innards. But I find domestic interiors soothing like this sofa and its plush. Therapists have permanence in their furniture. I have shame that I share my sorrows and fears with the wrong people, except for my therapist, a kind grave digger excavating the figurative despair, helping me find the sweetest and bluest violets, the ones that counselors might not mention. I recount the flowers I continue to like despite what's outside of this window's frame, a troll government, an authoritarian we are trying to forget in here. That was written during the pandemic. I just have two poems. So sometimes when people die, you have to leave your past behind. So I left a family. I was a stepmom for a long time. And I started trying to think about Hinduism and what I could learn from it. I was raised as a Hindu, but I've actually realized with so much of the caste supremacy, I'm really abandoning my sense of Hinduism. The imperishable and perishable family. There was a husband-father at one time, distinguished in phrases but not in gestures. There was a daughter circulating in vain attempts, calculating the usage of efforts, I'm afraid to say. I had painted her in pearly fabric amidst the lost husband-father who blew up our foundation when he sought to line draw the exaggerations in our field. What were perished actions of the family? I thought to resuscitate it all, and my cheeks blew inward. I was holding all my breath inside. This wasn't a good idea. So does this world spring from the imperishable, says the Upanishads, and led me to ask for a crystalline idiom, because in finding the daughter I lost myself. I realized too late I was granted tyranny for all the lost occasions. My therapist calls this manipulation. I decided to stake its claim. I will be done now. I knew I was the hat trick for them, and thus I'm over with the game because the game had since been done with me. I had no idea until I blew and blew and blew. So I'm just going to end with this last poem. And then it's A, and then it's 1, the number 1 with W-O-N, 1. A 1-1. In it I found that the political discourse would love its ethical moon, a wonderment, a one sum, bewitching affinities built upon antinomies, abstract and expression, a wool cap of ornament for the sake of weather. Loving him helpless anew helped. Loving her helplessly anew helped. Leaving it all behind helplessly helped. Building around the moribund became a kind of blessing. I left constituents around the number one, and I won, and I felt simple or glad, or finely incandescent and comfortably large in my honesty, a kind of hanging of the rituals, the clothes, the sense of living in them upright. I felt trouble pinging from my thumb muscles, but I ignored the throb. I looked out and out into a dense and driven fog and said goodbye to its flavor. I said goodbye to more than 10 years of saying, will you please love me? I wanted to birth a kind of abstract expressionism of the merely objective and the racialized lover of things. One-ment or ornament, or I won an ornament, or I loved an ornament, and the one-ment of myself resolved. I resolved, and thus I became into myself a one that I thought would never be allowed, and I moved outside of the fog into a place that signified art. Thank you.
Prageeta Sharma, everyone. Another round for Amy and Alexis and Matthew as well. And now we're pleased to be able to present just a little bit of a conversation moderated by Matthew. There'll be some space for Q&A at the end. So, Matthew, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, that was a really amazing reading. Thanks to you all. And I had instructed us all to come up with a question for our little group, and then we would open it up. And then, of course, forgot to do so myself, as is my wont. But I was thinking about what I had said about best American poetry, and I don't know. Were you admonished, Amy, when you edited the anthology? I was very sternly admonished by David Lehman that I was not allowed to problematize the word best in my introduction. I wasn't allowed to begin with by saying, well, is this really the best, and who can really say what's the best is, and all that, which I totally was planning on doing, by the way, and so it was good that he stopped me from doing that. But I was thinking about that, and I was thinking not about really talking about that word so much, but I wanted to ask you all about what you say when someone asks you what makes a good poem, or because I get asked that question a lot, and probably all of us do, as teachers, or is my poem good, or what's a good poem, and I'm wondering if you think that's even a valid category, or if you just think it all comes down to personal preference, or how you think about that. Is that too abstract a question to ask the group, or would anyone like to talk about that?
Yeah, I had the same experience that you did, exactly. Like, do not say this. You cannot. You can say anything you want except that.
Right.
Don't talk about best and how it's not best and there's no best.
Right.
And in terms of your question, I do think and kind of love the idea of how individual it is. How otherwise all the books in this series would be a lot more similar to each other than maybe they are. I love knowing what people's favorite things are. I like the word favorite maybe better, or stuff that, and then if I ever get asked to talk about what makes a good poem, sometimes I retreat into quotation, like Emily Dickinson saying the top of your head comes, because that leaves room for, everybody's got a different top of head volcano point.
Yeah. No, Prageeta, what do you think?
Well, I guess I was just thinking about the best American poetry and how it's curated in a certain way. So in some ways, I mean, I think you're talking about the word best, but I was just thinking about how it just reorients you to thinking about this year in poetry in a way that people get kind of lost with journals and lost with the space of where to find things. I mean, but that's not the question, but I was just thinking about that. So yeah, I guess I don't really teach my students to think about best, but I do like thinking about their honesty and their, thinking about their voices as unique.
Yeah. What do you think, Alexis?
So I agree with what you've all said. I think it's a really fine line because on the one hand, it does kind of have to do with personal preference, but then on the other, we can't just say that all art is subjective and everything is good to someone. Do you know what I mean? I think like music, for example, there are certain things that make some things better than others. What that is, that part depends on the person. But going off of what you said about honesty and voice, I was thinking about how Elizabeth Bishop said, "There's nothing more embarrassing than being a poet." And I think sort of embracing how embarrassing it is and not running from it, not trying to be less embarrassing, can make a poem really good. Does that make sense? You just put it all out there, like, yes, this is mortifying, that's the point. I think, once you do that, it will resonate with people. And some people will say, okay, this is, worthy of being a best poem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally makes sense. And I often talk to my students about, that when their poems get blurry or kind of just seem to lose their force, it's because they're hiding something. It's hard not to hide sometimes, and it's also sometimes appropriate to hide for a while until you're ready to not hide anymore. But I was just thinking when you all were talking too that I think I often retreat to the word necessary, which is equally meaningless in a certain kind of way, but necessary meaning that can either feel to oneself or to a feeling of necessity in the reader, or as necessity one can identify. But then of course I want to say, but I love things that are unnecessary so much. So I don't know how to answer that question. It's easy to evade the category of like good or has a weirdly ethical kind of quality to it, which baffles me. But the issue of quality, it's easy to evade it. But like you said, Alexis, there is also, I have a feeling that some things are better than other things. I just don't really know how to describe what that is. But I hope that the book enacts a certain kind of idea of what might feel necessary in American poetry, and also include, by its penumbra, poems that aren't necessarily in the book either, but an idea of what could make a poem necessary or good or worth reading, and like maybe expand that idea a little bit or something, I don't know. Did you all have questions that you came up with? Anyone? Amy, you said you had a question that you had come up with.
Yeah, but it might be dopey, so
Come on.
Oh.
it's real basic. So I was just thinking about how sometimes there are writers in our lives or books in our lives, either when we're younger or hopefully constantly, that are like, I was looking for a word for this, like permission givers or game changers or uncorkers, or writers that, or a single poem or a book or anything, and other art forms too, that do it to you and therefore allow you to do something, or just make you up your game or push you somewhere where you thought you couldn't go. Or and I wanted someone to make a word for that in like German or something where they smush all this. But I was thinking that when I really like a writer, and I like all these writers here, I want to know, like, who are those different people at different times in their DNA who like did something to them that changed them or allowed them to.
While everybody thinks of that, did you have one? And while everybody thinks of their answer,
I think just one of a zillion examples is this poet from the Bay Area, Tom Clark. I encountered him when I was really young, and his poems had like sex and drugs and surrealism, and he ended a poem with the word wow. And I was really young when I read it, and I was like, you don't have to say like forsooth or how do I love thee, which are all things I love too, but I was like, you can say wow, and it made me realize, oh, it can be vernacular and it can be slangy, and these are all all these dictions and you can mix them. Because he had old-fashioned stuff sometimes. So that, a long time ago, was like a super eye-opener for me. I was like, okay.
So I think that's an awesome question because I was actually planning on asking the exact same question.
No way.
Yeah. So I'm a formalist, and I think when people think about form and meter and, oh, great, another rhyming Robert Frost poem type of thing. So I think poets who really changed the game for me were poets like Marilyn Hacker or Randall Mann, poets who are colloquial and vernacular and fun, but when you read it, you think, oh, this is in perfect meter, or these rhymes are exactly where they're supposed to be, or this is a very difficult form, stuff like that. How a lot of people think that you can't, like, there's this wrong idea that there's a dichotomy between, like, free verse and formal poetry, and that the free verse people are the fun ones, and, like, the formal people are, like, you know, old and, like, on their deathbeds and stuff. But I think what I like about those two writers I just mentioned is that it shows, like, you don't have to pick a side. You can be cool while also abiding by really complicated received forms. And then as I got more into form, I started thinking about music as a form. And I was thinking about how artists, you know, songwriters, whatever, that's also a form. You know, putting it, having a bridge and a chorus and this and that. So I don't think this will, you know, surprise anybody, but I became, like, obsessed with sort of 90s grunge, Courtney Love stuff. Because I think that's also a really good example of, like, taking something raw and vulnerable and, like, creating, like, something with it that's really technically good. Yeah.
Courtney Love, also an excellent parent. I don't know if you know that, but it's a really role model for everyone who's all mothers and fathers everywhere. Yeah. Anyway.
I was just thinking about, early influences and anthologies, and finding anthologies in high school. And the Norton anthology of poetry had the poet I in there. And 20-Year Marriage, maybe, I think I, like, recited it at the dinner table, you know, like my parents were, and that's a really powerful and strange.
How did they react to that?
my brother started mocking me and changing some of the lines, but I think he also liked the poem, so we were, yes. So that, but then coming into undergraduate and discovering single books, but those single books really come out of anthologies where you then buy these single books of poets, and that feels cherished. So I'm just thinking about coming to poetry through anthologies, and then, I mean, I remember going to the bookstore with my dad, and he would buy the best American of everything. It was the essay, the short story, poetry. I have to look at what year this started. Was it like 80? Was it 85 or? Anyway, I was just sort of tracking,
Right.
and that would have. Yeah,
Since 1988.
yeah, so I remember just that, like, ritual of starting to buy the. So anyway, but I was the first one for me, I think, of contemporary poetry.
She's so great.
She's great.
Do you answer the questions too?
Oh, yeah, I can. I was just thinking, the reason I was on my phone is I was confirming. It's funny that you said forsooth, and then you brought up Tom Clark, because he has this great book about John Keats called Junkets on a Sad Planet. And so there's Keatsy words in it. But he was Tom Clark was a great poet. I was thinking about when I was in grad school, I was kind of my first couple of years in grad school, I was writing really wild poems that basically made no sense and totally fell apart, like, all the time. And they were, I mean, it was kind of exciting, but I was sort of not able to hold a poem together. And then I remember I read in succession, for some reason, Yanis Ritsos, Exile and Return is this book of sort of short poems by him, and then Cavafy. And I think something clicked for me where I was like, oh, you can be kind of pretty simple in the way that you think of how a poem works, but also really strange within it. And I think that was just a big moment for me, because I just realized that the there was like a way to do both things. You didn't have to make a choice. You know, one like had to be, you know, either, you know, total surrealism or just some boring, you know, thing or whatever. So there was a way in between. So that, for me, that was a big deal. That was just the first thing that came to mind when you said that about poets who changed it. Yeah, particularly Yanis Ritsos, the Greek poet. But yeah, I don't know.
And that's a little
Yeah.
similar to what Alexis was saying, I think, about you don't have, it's that a writer can teach you or something that you don't have to choose sides, that
Right.
you can try to get it all in there in your own way.
Exactly.
But I see that in all the I was thinking about that in all the poems that you all read, that some line by line, like in a way there'll be like a little bit of narrative and then there'll be a line that almost like kind of reacts against it to be super lyric. I mean, I was thinking you'll be very much in a situation and suddenly there'll be this really beautiful line that seems to be very idiosyncratically imagistic about, and like it's almost like within the poems you can kind of continue that multi-part conversation that of all your influences, you know, or impulses. Well, did you have an alternate question, Alexis? Or
Yeah. Okay, I thought of one. So I'll let you choose between these two questions. Let's go wild. First question, what is the worst advice you've ever gotten regarding poetry? Or if you don't want to like kill the mood and be negative, what is the best advice you've received?
I think they might be the same. Someone told me once never to use the word whisper in a poem. I was like, that's great advice and terrible advice at the same time. And so, yeah.
Well, what do you think?
About the word whisper.
About
I was
advice?
just trying to think of another word like that. But I think it's interesting to think about fads in poetry, and I wondered if you felt like when you were picking poems. I don't know. I guess I was just thinking about did you see something in this pandemic moment or in this time period or that you started to think about in the poems, or did you try to think more discreetly? I don't know what my question is. I'm just thinking about how did the pandemic and this period of time affect your editorial inclinations or?
Right. I will answer that question, and then you all can answer. You can have a little more time to think of your worst and best advice. So I'll stall for you while you think of it. I mean, I will say that I was dreading an onslaught of pandemic poems, mostly just because it would be a drag to read them, and also I was already so bummed out as it was. Like I didn't want to like read a million poems that just reiterated my own bummed outedness, and also I thought the book would be a bummer. If it was just a bunch of pandemic poems. I was pleasantly surprised to see that people were writing mostly about other things. It wasn't, I mean, there are some poems in there that explicitly reference the pandemic, and they're excellent, and but I was really happy to see that people were almost like trying to get to a different place in poetry, and that was terrific. And I just, yeah, I mean, probably the same thing that any reaction that anyone has who reads a lot of poetry. I mean, I was two things. I think the level of poem has gotten the basic level of poem has gotten very high. I mean, I would have days where I would read like 40 poems in a row and I'd be like, these are all great. Like I could get all these in here. And then they're, just, I realized, and then one would pop out and just be like, it would just be, to me, like shining in some kind of way the other ones weren't, but it didn't mean the other ones weren't really good. And a different editor could have easily selected a different one from that thing. So, but that's not particularly original. And then the other thing was just how many different things people are doing. And I mean, even like, one bummer for me is I did not include very many poems that rhymed or were super formal in this book. I don't know why, but I mean, but even Amy, you read a poem that rhymed, today, and I think it's like I'd love to see that in future editions, like more formal poetry that's doing interesting things. I just didn't. There's only so many things you can do, I guess, and I didn't. That's my one kind of regret, is that I would have liked to do that a bit more. But okay, did I stall long enough for you to think of like the bad and good advice that you got, or?
for poetry?
I think, I guess I can't think of the advice in particular, but I remember my undergraduate professor being really nervous about my entering a experimental creative writing program, like one that was more historically experimental, and that all of my formal poems would go away. But then kind of just spending time thinking about just different camps of poetry and how I don't think we're in camps anymore. I think that ended. Or maybe it.
No, I think, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know what my advice always seemed to be built upon what camp I was supposed to be in.
I don't know, Amy, what about you? Did you get bad or good advice, or?
I actually sort of think I need advice and would solicit it. I don't think I've got. I mean, because if somebody's giving you advice, at least they're paying attention. The piece of advice that I got was good. Was from a peer, not a formal teacher. Although I think one's peers and colleagues are one's teachers. And he said, cultivate your obsessions. Don't run away from them. And this sort of links up, I think, to what was being said about trying to be genuine or brave or your own voice or like that. And I was like, oh, you mean I don't have to? And what you said about the kind of holy role of embarrassment in a way, that was kind of a mind changer for me. I was like, oh, these things that I'm ashamed of or make me a weirdo, I could actually try to run towards them or something.
What about you, Alexis? What's the worst and best advice you got?
Okay, worst advice. There are like 5 people in this room who know this story. Worst advice was from an undergrad professor who said, "This is poetry, not therapy." But on a happier note, best advice was from my mom, who's here. I don't want to embarrass her or call her out, but
Spotlight.
but when I started my MFA program at Wisconsin, nobody else was a formalist, and I felt like I was sort of being like dissuaded or discouraged. People were saying things like, does this need to rhyme? Or like, why are you writing about this? Why are you putting it in this way? Make it free verse instead, all that. But my mom and one of my undergrad professors were both just like, no, stick with form. Stick with what feels right for you. And that sounds a little cliche, I guess, but kind of one of you was saying something about fads. And I was thinking about how, things that are popular in poetry, they're always coming and going and changing with, like, every passing year. I mean, even looking at this anthology, like, if you read the ones from year to year, they're all totally different, which is a good thing. So I was just, like, thinking, be true to yourself, write what you want to write the way you want to write it.
Are there questions from the, I have a hands up already. I can't, it's a little hard for me to see, so I guess I see some on the front and I saw a hand up back there, but you, don't just put your hand up like this because I won't see it. Yes, go ahead.
This is actually kind of building off of Alexis' question and touching on the forbidden word best, right? So I'm also a college professor, and there's a word that I tend to avoid in my class, which is should, because I try not to be prescriptive. But that's just in the classroom. As a human, I definitely think people should and should not do things. And artists should and should not do things. So I'm hoping you'll indulge me in this question and letting me know what you think, personally, a poet should do.
Oh, boy.
Answer.
Go ahead. You have an answer?
Poets should read a lot of poetry and just be immersed in reading, I think. I do think that because you just build such an important discourse with the poem the way you want to. You can read it however you want to, but you're really thinking about the line and you're in with poetry. I do think that's important.
I love your repurposing of the should from, because I love this answer from prescriptive to kind of inclusive or gathering, acquiring, and opening up to things. I read, lots of poets have said this, but so I don't know who to attribute it to. But if somebody can even a little bit learn another language or other languages, I think that's useful for a poet. For reasons that I think I don't need to explain. Not everyone can do that or likes doing that, but for those that either come to it multilingual or can make some forays in that direction, I think it's enriching and great.
Alexis, what should poets do?
I think poets should do something weird, like even weirder than writing poems. Just coming up with like a different hobby or like a niche interest.
Wedding dresses?
Whether it's like wedding dresses, reality TV, like whatever. I think that's kind of how you build your voice. Like, poets should like refrain from taking themselves too seriously and just have a little bit of fun. And then the poems will be better. I really think so.
Yeah, I also try to stay away from that word in the classroom for many reasons. But I since this isn't a classroom, I can dispense advice like the Pez dispenser that I am of advice. But the one thing I guess nearing the shouldness of things, I would say, in the back of the Norton Anthology of Poetry, there's a list of all the forms that are in the book. It's like a kind of like little appendix. I think poets should try all those forms, as long as I'm saying should. And then I also, this thing I do say to my students, and I don't think this rises quite to the level of should, but I really think poets should permit themselves to I call it like in class, put on the cape and like stand on the stage and like really sing, just sing, be dramatic, allow yourself to be lyric. I think there's such a pressure on us to be kind of cool or not to reveal, not to like embarrass ourselves. I guess this really ties in with what you were saying about poetry being embarrassing. It's like, I think going towards that, sometimes that's where the best lines come from, when you just like have gone completely over the top and you're like totally just in your own bag, like kind of just like going crazy. And like, it's like, and I just think I want people to permit themselves to do that, because I think that's just like a beautiful thing when somebody lets it go like that and just sings, like just sings. So there was a hand back there, I think, right? Or no? Was there a hand back there?
Oh,
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's hard to see, and then I saw another one up right, yeah, back there, yeah, yes.
Okay, so I bought this book at the Penn Station when I was jumping onto an Amtrak. I apologize. So what you were talking about with like how you were selecting these poems and you were worried about getting an onslaught of like pandemic-related poems. Do you think the pandemic needs to help select it a little bit more with the overall mood anyway? Because so far when I'm reading it, I feel like there's a lot of themes of like death and like blood.
How far in are you?
I kind of like jump around. I don't know if that's okay. If I'm supposed to read it back.
No, it's alphabetical.
Sorry. Okay, I have not taken a poetry class.
No, it's alphabetical, you can jump around like one, it's like, yeah.
Okay, like well, text and image where she's like painting some murder. I don't know. It just feels like the overall mood might have. Do you think the overall mood is still affected by the pandemic?
Maybe I'm just like a little bit of a gloomy person. I don't know. I tried to pick some funny poems, and I tried to pick some poems that had like, I even think like, or moments within poems that might have a more serious subject that were lighter. I don't know. It's hard for me to perceive the whole thing like that. I mean, your perception of it is totally valid. I hope it's not a downer to read the whole book. I really do. I did not want that, but what? Oh, no. I'm just saying, but it might be. I mean, my hopes and dreams might be dashed. So anyway, but keep reading, because there are definitely poems in there that have different moods and different things. So I hope you'll find things that lift your spirits a bit. Yeah. Right there, and that you who is now have your thumb pointed backwards. Yes, that was. Yes.
So, if the fraying bungee cord around Elon Musk's ankle snaps and Twitter goes kasplat, It is going to be good or bad for poetry.
Well, you're on Twitter, right?
I'm on
Yeah.
Twitter, but I don't feel like I'm making use of Twitter the way people
Elon
are.
would want.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is it good or bad for Twitter? Good or bad for Twitter if poetry snaps? Or no? Wait, that's backwards. Good or bad for poetry if Twitter snaps? Yeah. I don't know.
I think poetry can, I don't like to make predictions, but I think poetry might very healthily survive whatever terrible fate might happen to poor Elon Musk. I think it's been around a lot longer than him, or Twitter or the internet, or, I mean, we have to go back to stone tablets, that's okay with me. Chisel, we could do that stuff.
So I see both sides on this one. I've seen a lot of people, because I do spend an embarrassing amount of time on Twitter. A lot of people are complaining, oh, I won't get to promote my book here, oh, no one will know I exist. But I think overall, the Twitter writing community, it's rough out there. I mean, I've seen
Word.
some crazy, some writer said that Anne Frank had white privilege. Some other writer said that if you want to write, you should read a lot, and then somebody else said, "Oh, that's ableist." I just think it's a mess. I think it'll be great to have it gone.
I mean, I actually appreciate moments like when people say that Anne Frank has white privilege, because it's just that's a really, I mean, you don't often just see a really totally wrong thing said. That's objectively wrong, and now we can start measuring from that. But but I don't know. I mean, I think I would be totally fine with Twitter growing, but I will say that it is a way for people who don't have a lot of access to the mechanisms of literary power to kind of go around that. And
it's
we've seen
provided
that.
some people with a form,
Yeah.
people use
Well, that's true,
that nice compact
Right. I mean, isn't it the same
as a
number?
composition device,
Yeah.
which is
So I don't know. I mean, it will be what it will be. I have trouble believing that something that makes people that much money is going to go out of business. Maybe I'll end up eating my electronic hat, but I have a feeling that we're going to still have Twitter in our lives. Was there a question behind? Yeah, I see a hand up there. Yeah. You, yeah.
Me?
Yep.
Yes, you.
Oh, great. I'm very interested in the rhythm and the delivery of language and poetry, and that's why I sometimes play this game that when I buy a record of an artist I really like, that I first read the lyrics without listening to the songs, and then often I have this effect that I think it's not rhythmic at all. How should this get into a song? How should this have a flow? And then there's this surprising effect when it's interpreted and it's sung or spoken or screamed or whatever, and then suddenly it all falls into place, and after that the lyrics are not the same as they were before. You know what I mean? So that the way how something is said suddenly turns it into something different or even more valuable, or I don't know. Doing that. Yeah. So that it's not only the text itself that you could debate about, but also the way that it is turning into spoken language. Did you experience something?
Oh, I didn't know. Is that a question?
Like how important is the spoken version
Oh.
of that poetry?
I mean, I think it's I think there's so many internal rhythms in the poem that you're thinking about how lyric. For me, I'm thinking about the lyric and what my ear wants to recall, and how I can build the poem through lineation that way. So I can land on some words that build a more melodic ear for me, or work against that too, to think about it more atonally, or think about flatness and where I want to land. But yeah, reading it out loud helps me get grounded in the poem's sounds, and then just to think about the relationship of the two, just writing it and reciting.
you have any thoughts about that?
I'm formulating one, so come back to me. Do you have
Amy,
one?
did you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like what you said seems like an interesting and apt observation, and different poets have different relationships to this. I'm actually collaborating with someone and trying to write lyrics for songs for him for a musical, so I've been challenged by some issues that you brought up about I want some multisyllabic word that has all these consonants in it, and my collaborator is like, that is not singable. You have to think about the singer and about vowels, and so that's been super interesting and lovely for me to kind of try to mount that learning curve a little bit in a slightly different medium, but a very related one, I think.
You reminded me that there's a composer whose name escapes me who he had never, I mean, some of you might be familiar with it, he had never heard Bob Dylan, and so he took Bob Dylan lyrics and he wrote like
John Corleone.
Yeah, John Corley, right. And he wrote music, like classical music compositions to these Bob Dylan songs we all know, and it is fucking hilarious to listen to that. Because you're just like, this person is out of their mind. Like, it's like, but it's kind of great, because, you know, it's like a Rolling Stone, but like kind of, you know, with this music that has no relation to the tune or anything. It's great to listen to. It's mind-boggling if you're a Dylan fan, you know. I can't get my head around it, but. Maybe one final question. I know that we're kind of coming up on our time, and so quick question or yes, red shirt.
So how important is it to imagine the poems that you enjoy coming from a particular poet? Do they stand on their own, or is the human that created it an important part of the experience?
You mean in terms of imagine it in terms of like when I'm experiencing it, like how important is it, like who wrote it also, like to me, or?
Yeah. But, you know, for instance, could a bad poet write a good poem, or could someone you don't trust write a good poem? Or is your trust in the person part of the enjoyment of the experience?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, a lot of the poets in this volume, I never met them. I don't know who they are, and even the people I do know, I barely know. So I'm sure a lot of them are bad people. I certainly wouldn't allow them to babysit my kid, or you know, but it's unless I was desperate, but like I don't know. I mean, but I like that question because I think it probably does. It is part of my reading. I mean, it's impossible for it not to be. You know what you know, you think what you think, and probably most of my ideas are completely wrong. But still, they're probably part of my reading of it. You know, I don't know. But what do you all think?
I think I hate to say it, it's absolutely relevant who wrote it, just from an ethical standpoint. Like, I don't think people should be co-opting experiences or writing about things that they have not experienced necessarily. And I know it's kind of like a tricky balance, because some people will say, you know, what about a persona poem? Why can't I write from the perspective of, you know, blah, blah, blah. But like, for instance, if you are like a rich white male, should you be writing about, like, I hope I'm answering the question, should you be writing about like the Black experience? No. So I feel like if I'm reading a poem, I will only trust the poem and the poet if it feels real and authentic.
If you want to perform a little thought experiment related to this gentleman in red shirt, I have inadvertently been doing this because I just went on Instagram and I'm like, oh, it's a whole new world. I can look at cute animal pictures, and there's all these poetry things that you can sign up for. But the way the scrolling on my phone works, I read the poem and then you have to scroll to see who it's by. So I'm reading all these poems blind. And it is interesting to sometimes be like, oh, I really like that. I have no idea who this person is, or, oh, I didn't like that, and oh my God, it's by the god so-and-so. So yeah, that's been making me think about just what you brought up. I don't have a definitive answer, but it's interesting to think about.
Prageeta, do you want to have the last word?
I'm not sure what to add to this. I mean, we do this, we talk about this in class a lot, but often with older poems, there's a lot to say about the context and cultural references of an older poet, where we can't help but bring that into the reading and to think about close readings as being more, open to cultural references. But yeah, I guess that it's fun to think about the cult of the personality with certain poems. It's fun to think about the culture of poetry in that way. But I don't think it's necessarily required outside of the classroom. But I agree. I actually agree with both of you. And there's a lot of things that are more complicated to write about. And yeah, so that's to be continued.
Yeah, to be continued. Anyway, well, thank you all so much, and thank you, Quentin and Brianne Baroque.
One more round of applause.
I'm sure poets will be happy to sign copies of their books, or this book, or any book, anybody else's book. So yeah.
I did want to say one other thing too. If you've been paying attention to our publicity, we promised poets today, which I think we delivered on. We also promised tacos, which did not arrive. The truck broke down. So we've ordered some pizzas. If people want to stick around, there'll be some pizzas back here in the back patio. We have a great final reading coming up, so please stick around, hang out for a while. Thank you so much. Buy some books. Thank you.
That was great. You all are awesome.